So the first thing that I will do is remove the safety wire off of the front bolts. After I've done that, I'll go ahead and remove the bolts from the caliper and then pull the caliper off of the front brake. Once I have the caliper off and just sitting in my hand, I'll take a small set of needle nose pliers and go ahead and pull the arc clips out. Sometimes you may have to rotate the arc clips, but it's not that big a deal. Once you pull those out, I will use the tip of those needle nose pliers, go and press one side of the brake pad pin, push it through, and then I will grab it with my hand, not using a set of pliers or anything like that because I don't want to mar them up, and then pull the pin out. Once you pull the pin out, the retaining clip should pop out and you should feel the brake pads fall into your hand. Once you have that, I'll go and take all of those pieces out and set them in a tray, and then I will go up to the front brake lever and I'll squeeze just gently and holding down one of the pistons on each side just so I can go ahead and get them exposed a little bit so then I can go ahead and clean them and make sure that everything is clean, because if you don't do that, sometimes there may be some junk or something like that that's trapped behind the back of it. So I will get the pistons out, and it's really important that you don't go too far because the pistons can pop all the way out and all of a sudden you have brake fluid going everywhere and it's a major pain in the butt. I've done it a couple of times and it's terrible. Really, you just gotta have to figure that out yourself, and it's better to go not far enough than go too far. But it's just kind of a learning experience. So once you have those out, I will go ahead and clean the caliper. So what I use to clean front calipers is I use 2 squeeze bottles, one full of regular water, one full of soapy water. I will just use regular Dawn dish soap, and then I'll use a soft plastic brush. I don't want to use stainless steel, I don't want to use brass or anything like that because I don't want to mark anything up at all. You can also just use a toothbrush, I've seen that, and that works just great as well. One of the things is with brake dust, it's either hydrophobic or hydrophilic, so using brake cleaner doesn't clean it the way that it should. Regular soap and water, everybody has it, it's super easy, that's the best thing that you can use. So then I'll just take the soap and the water, spray that everywhere, clean everything, clean the outside, clean the inside, clean it all, make sure that everything's spick and span, and then once I've done that, I'll then go ahead and use the other spray bottle full of water and just hose everything off, making sure that I leave no soapy residue behind. And then once that is done, I'll take my air gun and just spray everything off, making sure to leave, again, no water, no residue, no anything. I don't want there to be anything that could get dried on. I don't want there to be anything that could possibly cause rust or anything else like that. So to get rid of any possible glazing that may be on my brake pads, I picked this up from a Superbike team, and what I do is I just take my brake pad and run it in a figure 8 pattern on the ground. It doesn't create that much dirt, it's not that bad, I just sweep it up afterwards and it's no big deal. And if you ever need to actually deglaze your brake pads, you want to do it in a 45-degree angle, and that's just so you're not going in the same way the brake rotor spins through the pad, and going in figure 8 is pretty close to that. So a few other small things that I will do is I will clean my brake retaining clip, which is some brake cleaner, super easy. I'll also clean the brake pad pin with some brake cleaner, and then I will run it through a Scotch-Brite pad really easily, just so then there's no dirt, grime, grit, or anything that may be sitting on there, where I want the brake pads to move as freely as possible. I don't want them to be getting hung up on anything, because that's more brake pressure that you may have to be putting, it may not be as consistent, and there may be some other wonky stuff going on. So once that is done, then I'll take both hands, and depending on how far out I push the pistons, it kind of depends, but then I just try and squeeze the pistons back into the caliper. Sometimes what you need to do is just get them in slightly, and then put one brake pad in, and then you can get better leverage on it. But as soon as you can put both brake pads in, do that, pop them both in, put your retaining clip back on, put the pin back through, and then I'll put the 2 R clips back in. Then, once that's all done, I'll just take a big flat blade screwdriver and then just pry them apart, separate them. For me, I try and keep everything equal, just so then there isn't too much force or too little or anything like that. I want to make sure that everything wears equal and that there isn't any kind of discrepancies. So I will have them equal on both sides, and then with that, you're all done. Go ahead and put it back onto your rotor, put the bolts back through it, torque it, and then safety wire it. Then what I'll do is I'll squeeze the brake lever just very gently while spinning the wheel, just so that I can get the pads to go back together without going too far in one way or the other. That's just something that I do. There isn't a specific reason, but I just want to make sure that everything is as smooth as it can be, and it takes an extra 5 seconds rather than just squeezing the whole lever in. So I just do little taps constantly while spinning the rim, and then you're all good. So I do run the brake retaining clip. I know people who don't. I know people who do. I've ridden without it. I've ridden with it. I decide to keep it on there just because, one, it's easier. Sometimes if you're not running it, the brake pads will get kind of cockeyed in there and then you're having to mess with it. And especially if they're hot, I want to be minimizing the amount that I'm having to touch a hot brake caliper. And for me, it's not that much weight, and 2, I don't really notice that much brake dust or anything like that getting in there, especially because I clean them quite often. So these are some of my notes to my younger self from the first time that I did this. The first thing that I would say is take pictures. Take pictures of everything. When you're pulling it apart, you want to be able to know exactly how it went back. So in case you did something, the first time that I pulled these off and then I was looking at the retaining clip and thinking, which way does this go in? And then that kind of got that anxiety in my stomach. You don't want to have any of that stuff. These are your brakes. Take your time. Make sure it's thorough. Don't rush it. Don't leave this for the last minute and then be rushing outside. Make sure that you've got this. Make sure you've got the time so you can make sure it's proper. These are your brakes. They're the one thing stopping you from doing 160 miles an hour on the track. If you don't feel confident about doing it, it's okay to put your arms up and try and use other resources, whether it's a friend of yours to come and do it, whether it's going back to this video to look at how I did it, going back and looking in your owner's manual. There's a bunch of different resources that you have, and you want to make sure that they're right, because again, they're your brakes. You want to make sure that they're good. So doing maintenance on the bike isn't a cure-all. I've had mechanical issues in the past. I'm going to still have mechanical issues in the future. There's just some stuff that you can't control or you don't think of, or something that just pops up out of the blue. It doesn't matter if you're a MotoGP team or if you're a club racer. It doesn't matter if you're an F1 or anything else. There's an unpredictability to our sport, so the biggest thing with doing maintenance is just to eliminate all the small stuff that you can. And if you go through the bike, then you can find some big stuff that you may not have noticed. And that's the biggest thing with doing maintenance. Isn't to eliminate all mechanicals. It's to try and reduce the risk that something may happen in the future. So this is how I bleed brakes. For me, I'll take a bunch of paper towels and just put them everywhere. I don't want to have brake fluid spilling at all because it's corrosive and it eats paint. So I just put more paper towels than I think is necessary. So one of the tricks that I find to bleed brakes is take my brake fluid and then I'll pop 2 small holes in with a screwdriver. So then there are only 2 small holes rather than pulling the whole thing off and you're dumping a quart of a pint. So you're not dumping a pint of brake fluid everywhere. This is super easy and you're not having to use a funnel, you're not having to use any other kind of specialty stuff. 1 hole for the fluid to go out and then 1 hole for air to go back inside, and it's super easy. I'll go ahead and remove the brake reservoir cap, pull that off, set it on a paper towel. Then I'll make sure that my system is full of brake fluid, just because you don't want to be squeezing your brake fluid and then all of a sudden a little bit of air pops in where you ran it too low, because then you have to bleed the brakes all over again. So I will then go down to one of the calipers. Again, put a bunch of paper towels because I don't want to have any spillage. So on my bike it's an 8mm for the bleeder. I will put the 8mm on with the closed side on, not the open side, just so I can leave it and it doesn't fall off. And then I'll go ahead and put my bleeder tube on as well. The best way that I've found to bleed brakes is just pump it a couple times, hold it, release the pressure, close it, pump it a couple times, release it. That's the best way that I found. I've tried using hydraulic systems, I've tried using systems that pull up vacuums and they're pulling the air out. For me, it's more trouble than what it's worth. There isn't that much fluid itself in the line, so it doesn't take that much extra time or effort to just bleed them. So that's just how I do it. For me, I don't bleed the brakes that often. For me, I just kind of go by the color of where I know what the color is when I put it in, and once it starts to get a little yellow or anything like that, then I immediately change it, which is around every 3 races or so. But that's just how I do it, that's just how I feel, that's just my riding style. Do whatever makes you feel comfortable, first and foremost, rather than following what anybody says. If you think that you should be doing stuff more often than what somebody else does, it's better to change your brake fluid too much than not enough, because you don't want to have a brake boil. I've been before where I was using the rear brake on a supermoto bike and I had the rear brake boil, and it was kind of terrifying. I wasn't ready for it, and all of a sudden you just have no brake, and that's just something you don't want to have. So for me, I'll bleed my brakes every 3 events or so, but if you want to do it more, by all means, do it more. So for me, brake feel is the most important thing on the bike, where I want to know exactly what's going on with the bike. I struggled for a couple of years on the R6 getting the right feeling with the front end, where I was either running brake pads that were too progressive or they were too aggressive, and I just didn't get the feel that I wanted. For me, I really like a linear brake pad, where the more that I squeeze, the more that I get, and if I'm just trail braking, it's not too aggressive. And that's a big thing for me. So the best thing that I found, and what I run on all my bikes, is EBC GPFAX. For me, they're super simple, and they provide the right feeling that I want. And you want to be comfortable on the bike no matter what it is, and these give me that comfort. Plus, they're available at any cycle gear across the country, so I know if something were to happen, I can still get the pads. Where we were in a pandemic last year, and one of the things is for some of the beginning rounds, people were having problems of where parts weren't coming in from Europe or they weren't coming in from Asia. And these, I know everybody's going to have them because they're a super common pad, and they're the best things that I've found. Plus, I run the EBC rotors, so I know that the two are designed for one another, where I'm not running this brand of rotor and this brand of pad. I know that the two are designed to go together. So, brake fluid, it is hydrophilic. What does that mean? It likes to absorb water, which is great for inside of your brake line, where if it gets exposed to air or any kind of water, it will absorb it, because there's a lot of heat that goes through your brake lines, and especially with the fluid, the boiling point of the fluid is a lot higher than the boiling point of water. And if your brake fluid boils, it's terrifying and you have no brakes. So that's why they designed it to be hydrophilic. What does that mean? It means that as soon as you open a container of brake fluid, it's been exposed to the air, so then it starts absorbing water. I will write the date on the side of it, and then I will only use that brake fluid for practice bikes or something like that. I will always use a brand new container of brake fluid in my R6, just because that's something that I don't want to ever have to worry about. A race bike goes 160 miles an hour. A KX65 that I put this in doesn't do nearly that speed. So it's 20 bucks at cycle gear. I'd rather spend that money and know that everything's good than have any questions in my mind. I write the date on the side so I know exactly when it was open, and if I have any hesitations, I just throw it away. Again, it's 20 bucks. It's not a huge deal. I'd rather know that it's good than have any questions in my mind.
I told Steve English, he'll tell you, I said Bastianini would win the championship this year. So I was actually 2 for 2 when you really consider it. I'm just saying.
Don't break your arm. Don't break your arm patting yourself in the back. You'll have to go to the doctor again.